Hi, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff Podcast. I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and isn't the year just flying by? We're late in October now, so really we're almost at the end of the second month of our spring period, and it's a really important time for our trees, and I want to dedicate this whole podcast to jobs you have to get done with your trees during the mid-spring period. It's a very important time for a lot of different species. It's quite diverse, quite broad, and without the work being done at this time of the year, I find that you can really miss an opportunity to take your trees to that next level. Plus, with the warm weather just around the corner too, we need to be prepared for that. And a bit of a cut now, a bit of a prune on a lot of the trees, and removing that fresh, delicate foliage and stopping that spring push, even if you are looking to develop the trees a bit further, unless it's a sacrifice branch. But if you are looking to just sort of steady them down with a bit of a grow cut method of pruning, this time of the year is really important, and without it, you'll find that when summer does get here, you may burn some delicate tips on the trees. But having a bit of a cut now gives a bit of a reprieve. So I've got a list of about 10 or so different things I want to talk about in the podcast. So let's go. Righto, I'm going to start with one of the most important things, if not the most important thing when it comes to your bonsai: watering. It's a very awkward time at the moment, as it is for most times with your trees. Underwatering at the moment seems to be more common than overwatering, but I'm definitely seeing cases of both. And just you can tell when you're overwatering, if you look at your trees and they're sludgy on top, where there's that slimy layer on top of the trees, then generally I'd reckon there's too much water being retained in the soil mix for whatever reason. That's not here to discuss why it's there. It's just holding a lot more water, or the tree's not taking up the water for whatever reason. So the tree's staying really wet. And if it stays like that for too long, then you'll find that you'll start getting a bit of root rot and a bit of dieback. So watch that. Underwatering is far more common, where you get caught by surprise with, warm winds, especially. That seems to be the killer for me. Those hot days where you turn your back and all of a sudden there's a bit of gusty wind. It may not be scorching hot, you might not be feeling it, but there's a lot of wind out there. So the tree's naturally taking up the water through transpiration, through the growth process, through the growing process, and you find that there's a bit of a gust around the place. That soil dries out pretty damn quickly. So make sure that you are 100% on top of the water, and the only way that I know of to make sure that you're getting it right is to be with your trees, to spend that time with them. Walk around the yard, check them thoroughly. If you've got to be out of the office and at work and you're not around the yard, not around the trees, as most people can't be, then if there's someone that is at home, even if they don't understand bonsai, just have a walk around and just touch a few trees for me. Or if you've got a camera system, that's fantastic as well. Maybe err on the side of caution where you're watering just prior to leaving, to give them as much time as possible before they do dry out. And then, as that heat kicks up in the afternoon, you just have to make an allowance. You have to work out some kind of system. And this is where using automated watering systems, while they're not the answer to everything, they certainly help at times like this where you can get caught out. And I wouldn't be surprised if by now there's a bit of leaf damage for anyone that has been underwatering, especially some of that newer foliage that hasn't hardened off yet. Browning on the tips is the common sight that I see. Browning on the tips of needles on pines and cedars and that sort of thing, that's quite common as well. So even though you might think it's all okay, if you are seeing a browning up on the tips, it's generally a sign that there's underwatering happening. So you need to be spot on with your watering and be very, very careful. Another thing we're having now is, I talk all the time about this bud conveyor, which you should know what it is by now, but it's allowing sunlight and air to get into those inner areas. And while defoliation isn't something that I will do automatically, and by defoliation, I suppose I'm in my mind, I'm thinking completely taking off every single leaf off of every single branch on every single deciduous tree that I've got. Partial defoliation or selective defoliation, that's the better term. Not partial, it's selective. I'm selectively removing enough foliage from the outer canopy. Normally it's the larger leaves on varieties like maybe a liquid amber or beech or something like that. It might be the larger leaves that I start to remove, or an oak that I remove to allow as much sunlight and air in as possible with minimal disruption to the trees photosynthesizing, and allowing that sunlight and air to get in to stimulate those inner buds, which will then become part of the bud conveyor for me. And just so I don't get dieback at the end of, I don't want to get to autumn and suddenly see all this inner branch structure is dead because it's just been completely shaded out and hasn't got any sunlight, and therefore it's just not really being allocated resources by the tree because it's not doing anything useful for the tree. So then it's just allowed to fade away, which is definitely not what we want. We don't want all your foliage on the outside. So one of the key things to do right now is have a look at those trees that you've got in your collection. Really categorize them. If you put your hand on the other side of the tree and just say, can I see my hand through there? And if you can't, then certainly sunlight is not going to be getting into those inner areas on the tree. So you'll have to do something. The process of defoliation can be really quick, really easy, really simple, not a massive job there. The tree needs to come into the workshop. Might be that I've got a pair of scissors with me and I just selectively cut off leaves until I can start to pass the hand test where I can see through the tree. Because if you can see through it, sunlight will get in there. It might just be that I'm using my hands. Some species like trident maples, for instance, there's a way you can grab the leaf with your thumb onto your finger and sort of pull the leaf off. And if you're pulling in the direction that the stem of the leaf is growing in, and you don't damage that bud that's at the base of that leaf, then it's perfectly safe just to grab the leaves and rip them off like that. So it's just a quick, simple task that if you don't do it, there's a massive repercussion somewhere down the track that you'll be paying. The other thing that I'm doing at the moment is looking at the species of pines that I'm going to be candle cutting. Now, it's a bit late now if you haven't been fertilising heavily these trees, if you haven't built their strength up. I hear a lot of conversations, a lot of chats, a lot of people talking in group environments, pushing the desire not to fertilise some of the single flush species, like for instance a mugo pine or a Scots pine or radiata pine, because they don't want to encourage the long needle growth. And there's I'd say it's old school thought now, not being disrespectful, but an old school thought that the nitrogen that you're providing to the tree is going to have a negative impact on the needle length of that tree. Maybe it does. I'm pretty certain it would. And there was also used to be a theory about, and I laugh because it seems crazy to me now, where you would hold water back from these trees to effectively starve them. So you're not fertilising, you're not repotting as frequently as what you should be, and you're not watering the thing properly, and you're wanting small needles to come as a result of that restriction. And then there's a surprise when the tree dies somewhere in the near future. So for me, I don't believe in any of that. I believe in having a strong, healthy tree, as you should know by listening to this podcast for however many years, 7 seasons now. I've been saying the same thing over and over and over, week after week. But having a strong, healthy tree and having a technique or a process that you can use to help reduce the needle length and get division, like what we do with black pines with decandling. I use the candle cutting process on those single flush, not on white pines, but on, for instance, the mugos and the Scots and the radiatas, single flush, multi-flush, continual flush, whatever you want to call them. I use candle cutting process, and then by having a strong, healthy tree and doing that cutting of that new spring candle, not the complete removal like decandling, but partially cutting into it and leaving some of the new needles there as well, then you get a backbudding process that occurs. And because you're doing it at a certain period along out of the growing season for these trees, then they've only got a certain amount of time before they go dormant again. So therefore, the needles that grow now have got a reduced growing period, which makes common sense that by reducing that growing period, you're going to get smaller needles naturally. But to do that, you've got to have a really strong, healthy tree, because if you have a weak tree and you go and cut off all that spring growth, then good chance you'll start getting dieback, and your tree may not back bud like you expect. You might get juvenile growth. It may not happen. So there's lots of reasons why it shouldn't. But if you do things right, if it's in the right sunny position, if you're watering it properly, if it's getting repotted when it should be, and you're fertilising and it's nice and strong and healthy, then all these different techniques like defoliation or candle cutting or decandling, it all becomes tools in our arsenal that we can use to further develop our trees. And I don't like to think about these tasks being used to force a second flush of growth or to push the tree harder than what it can handle. Like, it's always got to be within the constraints. Rule number 1, health assessment of the tree. Before you pick up any scissors, before you do anything at all with your bonsai, health assessment. Can it handle what I'm about to do to it? And if the answer is clearly yes, this thing looks fantastic, the needle quality looks beautiful, and this thing's lush, it looks great, then by all means, it's a tool that we can use to shorten our needles, to get more compact growth, to get, instead of just being one branch growing into one bud, we cut it off, we get multiple buds coming out at that point, we get division, we get shorter needles, we get all the stuff that we love when it comes to developing our bonsai, especially pine bonsai, and it makes them manageable, and it makes them predictable, and it makes them easy to look after when you know the process. If you don't know the process, then it's bloody damn sight harder. But working out the process for managing the needle length on these trees without being cruel to the tree and holding back from them means that you'll get a far stronger tree, far quicker developing than what you would in the normal world. And you look at a beautiful single flush pine, or any pine that's got nice compact growth on it with lots of ramification and beautiful needle quality. They're always healthy. You don't get a tree that has fine short internodes and beautiful, nice, strong, straight needles sitting nice and plump on a pad for a tree that's unhealthy, that hasn't been looked after, hasn't been watered when it should be, or it's not excessively watered, it gets fertilized, it gets repotted, it gets all the stuff that it should. Then these things happen. It's not by luck that some people have beautiful pines in their collection. It's because they understand the need for health of the trees, and right now is my time to start focusing on that candle cutting process, because it's close. Within the next week, 2 weeks, thereabouts, for me in my environment, based on my growing period that I've got, and this is where it's different for absolutely everyone listening to the podcast, but for me in my yard with my climate, microclimate that I have, in the next 2 weeks, candle cuttings can be a major thing for me. So I know I've got to gear up for that. I've got to go and check the trees, make sure that they're in a position and start ticking that box number 1. Is the tree healthy enough to handle what I'm about to do to it? So I spend a lot of time inspecting my single flush pines where I'm going to be doing candle cutting to make sure that they're going to pass the test, to make sure that they can then fall into that category of taking that next step forward. And I'm not going to do it and then a month later regret it when I don't see any new growth coming from that area. So another thing that I'm doing around the yard at the moment too, another really important job for me at this time of the year, is native repotting. It's definitely go time. It's a period where I find that the natives are starting to go nuts, which is great. The ones that love water, sitting in a tray of water, lapping it up, growing like crazy. So I've got a lot of foliage, a lot of styling on my natives, but I also have a period where I'm going to be repotting those trees as well. As long as they're ready for it, it's been more than a couple of years, then they fall into the category of needing repotting. If I've looked at those trees and thought you're really struggling, just putting them into a tray of water isn't going to solve my problem. it's just going to probably hold things back a little bit. And, talked earlier about seeing slime on the top of the soil. If a tree has got capacity for root growth, a native, and it's in a tray of water, then you don't get that slime sludge. So if you've got a native and you're keeping it in a tray of water, as is very common these days, and you've got slime on top of that water, then it's probably something that you need to consider how to fix that, because the tree does benefit from being in water, but it doesn't want to be submerged. Like those roots, that's why the trays of water are quite shallow around the base of the pot. They're not up to the neck of the tree, because you don't want to flood them. You want to make sure that they're getting the water they need, but they've also got capacity for root growth. So repotting is sort of seems to be a quite a long period with the deciduous, and then my conifers, and now a bit of a break, and then back into the natives. But it's really important, and I've got to make sure that I don't, because I was tired when I was repotting back in July and August. I've got to make sure that I fire up again and get the trees done that I have to get done. One of the big tasks that I do around now, and I'm going to lump a lot of trees into one big bucket here, I do a lot of deciduous pruning. I talked about the defoliation side of things, but regardless of whether I feel that a tree is too dense, now's a really good time for me to make sure that I can close the lid on my deciduous pruning process, my tasks. So when I walk around the yard, I look at every single tree. I look for those long shoots. I look for what needs to be cut back, because as I head in towards the hotter periods, which they're popping their head up all the time. It's getting hotter and hotter around the place, and a nice hot summer is literally just around the corner now. And I don't want fresh, delicate foliage to be exposed to extreme heat in any form. So I've got to make sure that, for me, I can tick the box and say deciduous pruning is done now. I normally like the latter part of October, early part of November, so I can make sure that that's done. And I'll also, in this deciduous, obviously, is my prunus, the fruit trees, for want of a better word. But with my fruiting trees, it's for another reason. I'll make sure that not only am I cutting them so I can get rid of those delicate new tips, I don't want a lot of new growth at this stage of the tree's development. But by doing that prune now on the prunus, most likely, almost always, but most likely, I'll say, you'll get another flush of growth coming on your prunus. And it's this next flush of growth where the tree will start to set its flower buds. So if you want to get prunus, I'll go a long way around. You need to work out what your plan is for the prunus first. Is your plan for structure, or is it for flowers? Okay, they're the two streams that you go down when you're working with prunus, because their structure can be a bit ratty. Like, be honest, it grows, it dies, it grows, it dies. You might have a nice trunk somewhere in there, might have a few nice primary branches, but really it's sort of a lot of the growth in there comes and goes pretty quickly. That's just the nature of the beast, I've found, with lots of different varieties, that they very rarely sort of start to compound. And if I'm looking to develop my structure, then I'll have pruned those trees maybe right throughout spring. I would have been, as soon as they start getting long, cut them back, because I'm working just on structure. Get out 4 or 5 leaves, cut it back to the second or third, no worries. Come out the next day after that, week after that. All right, it's grown again. All right, cut back to the second or third, depending on my structural growth that I want to get on this tree. And just keep pushing the tree back so I'm getting buds grow from everywhere. And that gives me a nicer structure on the tree. Whereas if my focus is on flowers on my prunus, which for me, that's sort of where they are. That's not something that's hidden or new to anyone listening to this. My focus for prunus is those flowers on the gnarly trunk. Magnificent. Cannot beat it. So for me, I'll generally let them run a bit ragged through that first part of spring, push out growth. There'll be new branches that have popped out of buds where old branches have died off. There'll be explosion of growth. Then I'll get them around this time of the year and I'll give them a good haircut. I'll cut them right back to the second or third, do the structural stuff in one hit. And then from there, I would expect normally to get a second flush of growth out of them. And it's his second flush of growth, which will be a lot shorter because as they head towards summer, they're not going to push like crazy like they do in spring. But you get a little bit of growth. They set their flower buds normally in those that new branches that are coming out, and I'll leave them alone. It might be that if I'm concerned about the new tips being very delicate, then I might just give them like an extremity prune to stop them sort of pushing any longer or continuing to push. But generally, I'll take those trees, I'll move into a more shaded, sheltered part of the yard during the summer period under shade cloth, and I'll leave them go with these longer shoots, because when it comes around next spring, I want to see those flowers. And then once the flowers have all come out and the foliage starts to grow, then they'll get a nice good haircut back again. Then they'll start growing again. I won't touch them again until late October, November, and do exactly the same thing year on year on year. There may be times where I look at those varieties and say, actually, I really want to work on the structure for a year. I'm going to, not worry about going for flowers. I'm going to start cutting this thing right the way through spring. So not all of them have to fit into one category or another, but it is definitely one of the things that I make sure it's on my check sheet for as I'm walking around my yard at this time of the year. So deciduous in all their forms are getting worked on right now to make sure that they've been given a good haircut. Make sure that those tips aren't pushing any further. Like I said, you may get a second flush of growth out of these trees, but I'm more in line with building the tree's strength up, knowing where summer's coming, than trying to continually push my trees harder and harder and harder. These varieties, the deciduous varieties, which is why I don't do full defoliation. I generally look at this prune plus a bit of leaf plucking here and there just to let that bud conveyor get up and going again. That's far more important to me and far more of a focus than saying, okay, I'm going to take everything off and I want this tree to work its guts out and I want it to do another flush of growth for me, because I've been there, I've done that, and it works. But is it consistent all the time? I don't know if it's fully consistent all the time, but there is a downside when it doesn't work, and until I suppose you've experienced that downside, then you won't know what I'm talking about. But if you have seen some dieback, if you have seen if we do get a couple of hot days, some leaf burn, that young fresh leaf get flogged, especially with the extremities we seem to be having all the time now with our weather in one shape or another. For me, I'm definitely making sure that I am in the cautious zone as opposed to that push everything to the envelope, to the extreme all the time. And with that said, too, I am getting ready for the last round of fertiliser for spring. So big feeding time for me is spring and autumn, always during those two growing periods. And I want to make sure that I don't miss the boat. It's easier I've found with this, let's call it a November feed, the last month of summer feed. It's far easier to go, you know what, everything looks great, I'm not going to worry about it. But it's really important. It's really, really important. I can't stress that enough, especially if you've got trees that you are looking to decandle, like the black pines. If you have got any of those, give them another bag of fertilizer. Make sure that you are definitely focusing on the health and strength of the tree, as opposed to anything else. It's not about you. This is about the tree. And, you've got to get to that point where you can, before doing something like decandling, that you can tick the box and say, is the tree strong enough to handle what I'm about to do to it? And if you look at it and go, well, really, I should have fertilised it one more time. I did it once and a half. I was a bit late with the first one. It's a bit late with the second. Does that count as enough like fertiliser? Is it? No, it's not. It's not. And then, don't go, be honest with yourself, because you'll go chasing your tail afterwards going, well, it didn't respond well after decandling because it was too hot. There was something wrong. It was the soil mix that the tree came in. Maybe everything like that's true, but for me, I always have a good hard look at myself when something goes wrong, because 99.9% of the time it's on me for whatever reason, whatever it is. Fungal issues have kicked off because I haven't cleaned the benches and I haven't pruned properly, and the tree was in a sheltered corner and I wasn't doing what I should have been doing. Now, there's a million and one things that can go wrong with our trees, but almost always the finger points back at myself for something that I haven't done. So I do make sure that I am fastidious about this last feed, because it's the easiest one to forget, especially when you've got nice full trees. You've just been out there, like I said, cutting and doing partial defoliations, and everything looks lush and the green bin's overflowing every week because there's so much to do around the yard. But that final feed before we get into that summer period really makes a difference. How they come out the other end of summer. Summer's tough. It's hard. It's hard on the trees. It's hard on us. It's a great time to go surfing, but it's definitely hard on the trees. And this final feed, while they're still in this period where they are using it and they're not going through the dormancy of extreme heat, then it does make a massive difference. So get on it. You've got a little bit of time before you have to have the feed on there, another couple of weeks or thereabouts, but make sure that you're ready for it. While we're talking about summer, this is the time. You're just around the corner now. I've talked about the watering system a couple of times in recent podcasts, but it's definitely something to be mindful of. If you haven't got one, then spend some time. Go and have a look, see what you could do. It doesn't need to be an elaborate system. It just needs to be something that you can have as a, maybe middle of the day backup, where it just sprays water generally for a minute or 2 minutes. Just take the heat out of the air. Let the trees just get a reprieve just for a second. You might be thinking, I don't need that because I can pick up my trees and bring them inside on those super hot days. Yeah, you might be able to. That might be great, but you're going to really do it forever? Is it going to stay that way forever? You're always going to bring those trees into the garage or into the laundry or bathroom or living room, wherever they're going to live. Every single day it gets hot over summer. What happens if you're away? What happens if you're out, visiting your friends? What happens if you get caught by surprise and you have to go somewhere and you don't have time to get outside and grab the trees and move them? Well, this is where this backup system, and that's exactly what it is, a nice backup system. I rely on it. I have to when I travel. I have to have a system that's top notch. That I've looked for any chinks in the armor, but you may not need to have that as comprehensive as what I do. The better. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it, and the more you can rely on it. But there are simple systems around that you can put in place, and throw in a cheap camera just to check that it's working when it says it's working. Set up alarm on your watch. Have the thing come on at 1 o'clock every day for 2 minutes during the weekdays when you're in the office. Have your alarm go off at 2 minutes to 1 so you can tap into the little camera that you've got focused on the watering system, and just have your lunch break. Just have a quick look on your phone and just check that the watering system is doing exactly what you think it should be doing. Guaranteed, it'll make you feel $1 million. It'll make that lunch that you're eating so much sweeter, because you can rest assured that everything's okay. And if it's not, make a phone call, or at least know that when you get home that you have to get out there straight away and water those trees. It's just a nice little backup system. It's not something that possibly you have to rely on 100%, but having it will definitely make a massive difference for you and your trees going forward. And the last thing to talk about in the podcast is cedar work. Now's a good time to be working on cedars. For me, anyway. I love my cedars. I think that they're a magnificent species that possibly is a little bit in that category of penalise them and keep the needle short, as opposed to keeping them strong and healthy and expecting really nice growth to come out of them. Genetics plays a massive part in them as to how good they're going to be. So when you're selecting a cedar, make sure that you're looking for a nice needle colouring, growth rates, all that sort of stuff. But there's definitely a hell of a lot of cedar work that's about to happen for me now. Plucking of old needles, removing downward growth, looking at those spears that have shot off over the last couple of months. over spring, looking to reduce those, getting in there, doing a bit of gentle wiring to make sure that they're sort of positioned as they are. I don't focus too heavily on the wiring side of things now because I know I've got the autumn period where I can get in there and do that a little bit easier, a bit more flexible. But I'm definitely all over the cedars. I want them to look really nice sort of by November, because they've had a good couple of months growing, and it's time to stop those tips extending, which means that then resources will push back further to the buds, back further along the branches, and keep everything nice and healthy and going the way it should be going. So cedars are definitely one on the radar for me to look at now. So hopefully that list has given you certainly plenty of homework to do, but also a few key tasks and why we do them around the yard for this sort of mid to late spring period in Melbourne, or in Australia anyway. Forgot to mention too, one last thing before I wrap up the 41st episode of season 7. My God, podcast. It's also a time for me to be repotting my figs, my ficus, in Melbourne. It's definitely warm enough now for them, so I like to stay on the front foot with them too. I put them, they're sort of around about the same sort of time as my natives, maybe a touch later than my normal, well, not normal. What is a normal native? Than most of the other natives that I repot. So the figs are generally around them, whether they're natives or not. They all get done. Once it gets to be that warmer temperature consistently overnight, I'm definitely working my way through giving the figs the love they need when it comes to repotting. So it's another species to be repotting. These repotting tools never seem to get put away for very long. I can guarantee you though, after the figs and after the natives, that's it. No more repotting until winter next year. I'm not. There's no more excuses. I'm not doing any more. That's it. I'm done. Thank you for listening in. Thank you to the subscribers of the podcast. It means the world to me, and I love you all dearly for it. Keep an eye on that watering side of things. It's something that I talk about regularly because it is something that we can get caught out on pretty quickly and frequently too. It happens far more than what you'd expect. So just keep an eye on them. Spend some time with the trees. The pests should settle down by now with that hardening off of the foliage. You should hopefully be seeing a lot less. If you do have pest issues, then maybe it's something else that needs to be looked at, but it shouldn't be from that new foliage, especially if you've been through and given them all a nice haircut and pushed them back. Give your trees a cuddle for me. Until next time, as always, happy bonsai.